If you would go to a mental asylum or a hospital today, then you would see that most patients are happy and being taken care of. But if you would go back in time, then you would see that many of the mental asylums and a few hospitals were truly hell on earth, and to this day, the abandoned buildings are still haunted by the spirits of the past. The Taunton State Hospital. The Taunton State Hospital, originally known as the State Lunatic Hospital, is located in Taunton, Massachusetts, and was built in 1854 as a psychiatric hospital. The patient population quickly grew to 250 in its first 8 weeks, and by 1873, the number had doubled. The staff members were known to abuse the patients, and there are even rumors that say that some of the doctors and nurses at the hospital would take some of the most troubling patients into the basement to be sacrificed and tortured in satanic rituals. To this very day, people have reported a feeling of unease and agony when they have approached the door to the basement. Some of the more famous patients at the Taunton State Hospital are Thomas Hubbard Sumner, known for developing the celestial navigation method known as the Sumner Line. Another patient was a serial killer named Jane Taunton, which had worked as a nurse and killed over 31 patients at Cambridge Hospital by overdosing her patients. The hospital was later closed in 1975 and fell into disrepair. People who have visited the old hospital has reported hearing terrifying screams and whispers. Some even claims to have seen Jane Taunton herself. But the most terrifying reports is about a shadow man. A man who would crawl on the walls and follow you around. They say that when you can hear a horrifying breath, the shadow man is not far away and you better leave before he sees you. The Ridges Asylum. The Ridges was a mental hospital located in Athens, Ohio, between 1874 to 1993. By the 1950s, the hospital had over 2,000 patients. With so many patients and with a lack of staff members, would patients often be restrained for days at a time. 5 to 10 patients were living in rooms meant to house only one patient. They were often beaten and tortured by cruel hospital staff. But many patients didn't get away with only some beating. Some poor patients went through a treatment called lobotomy. They would first use electricity on the patient to make them unconscious, then roll the eyelid back and insert a thin metal instrument called a leucotomy through a tear duct and into the brain. It was then dragged back and forth to sever the neural receptors. The consequences of the operation were different for each patient. Some patients died as a result of the operation, and others later committed suicide. Some were left severely brain damaged, while others were able to leave the hospital or became more manageable within the hospital. When the hospital later closed, were many of the buildings donated to Ohio University. University students would often tell stories about disembodied screams that could be heard throughout the long and dark halls, or horrifying figures standing in the hospital rooms, smiling or crying. But the most terrifying story of all is about the large stain on the top floor of the building. It all starts on December 1st, 1979. A patient by the name Margaret Chilling went missing. The hospital staff searched for her for days, but with no luck. It wasn't until 42 days later that her body was discovered, locked in an abandoned room once used for patients with infectious illnesses. Margaret was found completely naked, her clothing neatly folded next to her body. The doctors of the hospital believed that she had died of heart failure. Because she had been dead for several weeks, her body had decayed so much that a gooey imprint of her body had seeped into the concrete. The stain couldn't be scrubbed out, no matter how hard they tried, and to this day the stain of her body can still be seen on the top floor of the asylum. And it is said that you can sometimes hear the screams of Margaret trying to escape the room where she died. The Changi Hospital. Changi Hospital is located in Singapore and was built in 1935 as a hospital for British soldiers. When World War II erupted, British soldiers were preparing to use Singapore as a naval base. But before they could finish constructing the base, the Japanese attacked the British and took control of the country. The Japanese converted the Changi Hospital to a prison camp for prisoners of war. The Japanese secret police, known as the Kempeital, operated the prison and was known for their brutal torture techniques. The Kempeital placed iron stakes outside the building where they impaled the hands and heads of executed prisoners to strike fear in the locals. When the war finally ended, many from the Japanese secret police were executed at the Changi Hospital. The British then put the Changi Hospital in operation once again. The hospital was later abandoned in 1997 after thousands of witnesses reported seeing apparitions of Japanese and British soldiers or hearing the terrifying screams coming from the poor souls that were tortured and executed in the hospital. To this day, locals have reported seeing Japanese soldiers drenched in blood, and some claim to have seen a small boy sitting in one of the windows crying. The Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum. The Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum first opened its doors in 1861 and is located in West Virginia. Its grounds on which the asylum is built on consist of 666 acres, and if you did not already know, 666 is the devil's number. The asylum was designed to house around 500 patients, but at its peak, 2,400 poor souls were living in horrifying conditions within the asylum's walls. The treatments at the asylum was horrifying and brutal. The doctors would often use electroshock therapy, perform lobotomies, and use bizarre and deadly chemical treatments. It was also common for the worst patients to be locked into small cages where they would scream while being beaten by the asylum workers. There were also many incidents of patients killing other patients, and sometimes even female asylum workers was raped and killed by the patients. In one case, a nurse mysteriously went missing. 2 months later, her rotting body was found at the bottom of a stairwell. Her body had been mutilated and signs of rape were found. It did not take long until rumors started to appear, claiming that the building was haunted. Workers reported hearing hysterical laughters, bone-chilling whispers, and creepy knockings coming from within the walls. And this was reported from the rooms of the floors where no patients were allowed to be in. By the time the asylum closed in the 1990s, hundreds of sightings of apparitions had been reported. One of the most haunted areas of the asylum is known as the Civil War Wing, where people have reported seeing the ghost of a Civil War soldier known as Jacob. Another location within the asylum where paranormal activities are common is the 4th floor, where loud banging noises, terrifying whispers, and ghost sightings have been reported. The Waverly Hills Sanatorium. Waverly Hills Sanatorium was once a medical facility dedicated to treating patients suffering from tuberculosis. The facility soon became overcrowded and there weren't enough staff members. The patients was often beaten and sometimes killed by the staff members. There wasn't any cure for tuberculosis at the time, so the standard treatment offered to the patients was fresh air and a lot of sunshine. There were also many cruel and painful treatments used on the patients. For example, doctors would surgically remove several rib bones of the chest wall in order to collapse a lung. Only 4 to 5% survived the treatments, and it is said that more than 60,000 patients died of diseases or from the unusual treatments used at Waverly Hills Sanatorium. The bodies of the dead patients would be thrown down a chute that led to an underground tunnel and then taken out of the building. Later came the discovery of the antibiotic that was able to successfully treat and cure the patient, which led to the sanatorium closed. Many ghost hunters believe that the spirits of the patients still roam the empty hospital. One particular spirit that is said to roam the empty halls is Mary Lee, a nurse that used to work at the sanatorium, but she took her own life by hanging herself in room 502. The spirit of Mary Lee is believed to have been captured on this photograph. It is said that you can sometimes hear her horrifying screams echoing throughout the empty dark halls. Like and subscribe or you will die.